Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into the life and thought of one of philosophy's most fascinating and often misunderstood figures, Arthur Schopenhauer. A man whose bleak yet profound worldview continues to influence not only philosophy but literature, psychology, art, and even modern pop culture. Now, when most people hear Schopenhauer's name, they immediately think of pessimism, the gloomy philosopher who declared life is suffering. But behind this seemingly dark view of existence lies a complex system of thought that blends metaphysics, psychology, art, ethics, and yes, even theology. In this video, we'll explore Schopenhauer's philosophy in detail, tracing his central ideas about the will, the role of art, compassion as the basis of ethics, and his engagement with both Western theology and Eastern religious traditions. By the end, you'll see that Schopenhauer was not just a pessimist, but a thinker who tried to grapple with some of the deepest questions of human existence. So, grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's begin our journey into the mind of Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in the city of Danzig, now known as Gdansk, Poland. His father was a wealthy merchant, and his mother, Johanna Schopenhauer, became a well-known writer and socialite. Arthur was exposed early to literature, travel, and culture, which broadened his perspective beyond the ordinary education of his time. Yet, his childhood was not happy. His father was strict, depressive, and eventually died under mysterious circumstances, likely suicide. His mother, while social and intelligent, often clashed with Arthur, who was introverted and critical. This tension in his family life perhaps foreshadowed his lifelong struggle with loneliness, melancholy, and alienation. Intellectually, Schopenhauer came of age in the aftermath of Immanuel Kant, whose critique of pure reason had revolutionized philosophy. Kant argued that we can never know the thing in itself, or ultimate reality, but only phenomena, the world as it appears to us through the structures of human perception. Schopenhauer took this idea and radicalized it. He wanted to uncover what lay behind appearances, what reality truly is at its core. And this search led him to his most famous concept, the will. In 1818, Schopenhauer published his magnum opus, The World as Will and Representation. The title itself is crucial. According to him, the world has two aspects. First, it is representation, the world as we perceive it. All our experience, everything we see, hear, and feel, is mediated through our mind. We never encounter reality directly. We encounter it as it appears to us, much like Kant argued. But second, behind this representation lies the will. Schopenhauer identified the will as the ultimate reality, the thing in itself that Kant had said was unknowable. For Schopenhauer, the will is not rational, not conscious, and not benevolent. Instead, it is a blind, irrational, striving force that manifests itself in all living beings. This will expresses itself in human desires, in the instinct for survival, in reproduction, in ambition, and even in conflict. It is the endless push to exist, to consume, to expand, never satisfied, always yearning. And because the will is never satisfied, life is filled with suffering. We desire, we struggle, we grasp, and even when we achieve our goals, satisfaction is temporary. Soon enough, new desires emerge and the cycle begins again. In one of his most famous lines, Schopenhauer wrote, "Life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom." This is his pessimism in a nutshell. Pain comes from unfulfilled desire, boredom from fulfilled desire. There is no lasting peace in the ordinary human condition. Now, where does theology come in? Schopenhauer was not a traditional Christian thinker. In fact, he was deeply critical of organized religion, especially Christianity in its dogmatic forms. He thought much of Western religion was full of empty promises and moralistic preaching. However, he was far from a simple atheist. In fact, what makes him fascinating is his openness to non-Western religions, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism. Schopenhauer was one of the first major Western philosophers to take Eastern texts seriously. He read the Upanishads, he studied Buddhist teachings, and he found in them a striking resonance with his own philosophy of the will. For example, Buddhism's teaching that life is suffering, that craving leads to pain, and that liberation comes from extinguishing desire. All of this harmonized with Schopenhauer's worldview. Likewise, the Hindu idea of Maya, the illusion of the phenomenal world, echoed his notion of the world as representation. So while he rejected the Christian notion of a personal, loving God, he wasn't dismissive of spirituality altogether. Instead, he saw religions, especially the mystical and ascetic traditions, as symbolic attempts to express deep truths about the human condition. He once remarked that the Upanishads were the consolation of his life. This theological dimension sets Schopenhauer apart. He wasn't just a philosopher of pessimism. He was a thinker who saw philosophy and spirituality converging in the recognition of suffering and the quest for transcendence. But if life is suffering and the will is this blind, ceaseless force, what does that mean for morality? Should we just give up, or live selfishly since everything is futile? Schopenhauer's answer is actually quite surprising. He grounded ethics not in rational rules or divine commands, but in compassion. For him, morality arises when we recognize that the same will that drives us also drives others. When we see another person suffering and we feel compassion, we momentarily overcome our ego and recognize the unity of existence. But Schopenhauer did not stop there. He also believed that art provides a unique escape from the suffering of the will. Think about when you're absorbed in a beautiful piece of music, a painting, or a work of literature. For a moment, your desires fade away. For Schopenhauer, this experience is profound. In art, the will is temporarily silenced, and we glimpse a form of transcendence. Among all the arts, he placed music at the highest level, because he believed music doesn't just represent phenomena, it directly expresses the will itself. This idea influenced countless artists, composers, and writers. Richard Wagner, for example, was profoundly shaped by Schopenhauer's philosophy, weaving it into his operas. Writers like Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and even later thinkers like Freud and Nietzsche were also impacted. If compassion and art offer temporary escapes from the tyranny of the will, Schopenhauer also believed there was a more radical path, the denial of the will. What does this mean? For Schopenhauer, the deepest form of wisdom lies in recognizing the futility of desire itself. This is why he admired ascetics, monks, saints, mystics, who turned away from worldly pleasures and ambitions. Here we see another striking parallel with Eastern traditions. Buddhism's ideal of nirvana, the cessation of craving, is almost identical to Schopenhauer's vision of salvation through the denial of the will. Now, to understand why Schopenhauer was long ignored in his lifetime, we need to mention his rivalry with another giant of German philosophy, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel was the most famous philosopher of Schopenhauer's day, and his lectures in Berlin attracted huge audiences. Schopenhauer despised him. In a famously arrogant move, Schopenhauer scheduled his own lectures at the exact same hour as Hegel's. The result? Everyone went to Hegel, and Schopenhauer's classroom was almost empty. This failure embittered him, and for decades he lived in relative obscurity. He published little, lived alone with his poodle, and was widely dismissed as a crank. It was only later, in the mid-19th century, that his ideas began to gain traction, especially among artists, writers, and a younger generation disillusioned with the optimism of German idealism. Schopenhauer's influence is vast and cannot be overstated. Friedrich Nietzsche began as a great admirer of Schopenhauer. His early work, The Birth of Tragedy, echoes Schopenhauer's emphasis on art as a response to suffering. Later, Nietzsche broke away, but without Schopenhauer there would be no Nietzsche as we know him. Sigmund Freud was influenced by Schopenhauer's insight that our conscious mind is driven by deeper, irrational forces. Freud's concept of the unconscious owes much to Schopenhauer's idea of the will. In literature, authors like Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Thomas Mann, and Marcel Proust engaged with Schopenhauer's themes of suffering, desire, and the search for meaning. Even today, Schopenhauer resonates. In a world saturated with consumerism, social media, and endless craving, his warning about the futility of desire feels eerily modern. Let's circle back to theology for a moment. If Schopenhauer denied a personal God, if he saw life as suffering, then what role does theology play in his system? The answer is that theology, for Schopenhauer, is valuable not as literal truth, but as myth and metaphor. In this sense, his philosophy stands at the crossroads of East and West. He stripped theology of its dogmas, but preserved its existential insights. Some scholars even call him a Buddhist philosopher in disguise. Of course, no philosopher is without critics, and Schopenhauer has plenty. Many accuse him of being overly pessimistic. Is life really just endless suffering? What about joy, love, creativity, and human progress? Yet despite these critiques, Schopenhauer endures. And perhaps that endurance comes precisely because he articulated something we all, at times, feel but are afraid to admit, that beneath our achievements and pleasures lies a restlessness that never goes away. So what can we take away from Schopenhauer today? First, his philosophy is a reminder of the reality of suffering. In a culture obsessed with positivity, productivity, and constant striving, Schopenhauer asks us to pause and recognize the cost of desire. Second, he shows us the value of compassion. In a world fractured by selfishness and division, his insistence that morality rests on seeing ourselves in others is as urgent as ever. Third, he elevates art and beauty as sanctuaries from the chaos of life. And finally, he invites us to reflect on the possibility of letting go, of finding freedom in simplicity, humility, and self-restraint. Arthur Schopenhauer has often been called the philosopher of pessimism, but perhaps it's more accurate to call him the philosopher of honesty. He dared to face the darker side of existence without flinching, yet he also sought paths of compassion, beauty, and transcendence. He did not offer easy answers. Instead, he told us, "Life is suffering, desire is endless, but in recognizing this truth, we may find a deeper wisdom." Whether through compassion for others, through art, or through the radical path of renunciation, Schopenhauer offers us a way of confronting life without illusions. So, next time you feel caught in the endless cycle of wanting more, remember Schopenhauer's words, that the pendulum of life swings between pain and boredom. But also remember his hope, that in compassion, in beauty, and perhaps in letting go, we can rise above the restless will and glimpse something greater. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration of Schopenhauer, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives and ideas of the world's greatest thinkers. Until next time, take care and keep seeking wisdom.